Hello, this is Peter Ydeen, and this is a lecture on Easton Nights, an urban landscape photography series done in Easton, Pennsylvania. And I'll start out by paraphrasing the photographer Frank Golke in one of his lectures, where he said the last person you want to ask about a person's art is the artist himself, because artists just do it. And that applies to this series because it was not a planned series. It was just my going out and photographing things of interest to me that fit my own aesthetic. So I'm starting with a backdrop of Walker Evans' photo from 1935, just trying to show there's such a great history in the Easton area. But we came to Easton in 2011. My wife and I have a business selling Chinese antiques. And we had a very large inventory living in upstate New York with a small shop in New York City. And the property had become too big and too involved and too expensive. And we wanted to scale down. And so we came to Easton in 2011, thinking it was a stop on our way to New York City for a few years while we pared down our inventory and made it manageable before we could move into the city. Now, Easton lies on the Delaware River, and you can see the other river coming into the Delaware is the Lehigh River. This is very important to its history. Both rivers have a canal system. The Delaware Canal, you know, but the Lehigh Canal brought coal down from the coal regions to the Delaware Canal. And during the canal era, during the early 19th century, it was the epicenter of the Delaware Canal and supplied coal all over the Northeast. The Lehigh Valley starts in Phillipsburg, which is across the river from Easton, and goes west through Allentown. And it has a population of approximately 900,000, almost 1 million people, which is one of the important aspects that I am going to go over later. The second aspect is the history in Easton. Has a very long history by American standards, going back to the Treaty of Easton, which was a turning point in the French and Indian Wars. And I'm not going to go through all this bullet points, but it was the second largest silk producing area in the United States. It was the second largest steel producing area in the United States, with Bethlehem Steel, which only went bankrupt back in 2003. It was the headquarters for Crayola crayons, Dixie cups, and Mack trucks, and it's still the fastest growing area in Pennsylvania. So very long and involved history. Now, the setup of the Lehigh Valley is one of the very special parts of Easton Nights. You can see this is a list of municipalities. There's 100 here. And Lehigh Valley, which has almost 1 million people, never really gelled into a city in the way that Philadelphia or New York did. I think in the 50s, it almost got there had cable cars and fancy department stores. But the energy in the Lehigh Valley has always been in the parks. And at one point, I tried to count the main streets in the area, and I stopped at 50. There's many main streets, many little towns, and it's almost an example of small town sprawl as opposed to urban sprawl. All these small towns growing together, but never really gelling into one unique city. So you put this together with the long history, and it creates a very special area. It's almost like a museum of Americana. So I'd like to get into the series itself, Easton Nights. The series started in the fall of 2016. Previous to that, I have been doing photographs like this, stairs behind the mall. I did a lot of shots behind malls and behind stores because I was working in a very minimalist way. And I treated the photograph almost like an object in itself. So I was invited to a show in California for night photography. This was the fall of 2016. And I started looking online, and the one photographer who really resonated with me, and now in hindsight, I can say a lot of reasons why that happened, but I kept coming back to George Tice. And he was a photographer who lives not far from where I live now, and photographed very similar areas. And he photographed in a way that I just really responded to. So I set my camera at f8 and ISO 200. I read online also that those are settings to use, and that's how I started. And this was my first image, the one that was in that show. And as you can see, it's also very simple, minimalist, sort of connecting to the shots I was doing behind the malls. Very simple, treating the photograph almost as an object. If there's one aspect of night photography that I think is the most unique, it would be that in night photography, the image draws you inside. Now, these are two of my photographs, both done actually at very similar times. And the No Idling is a night photograph done very early in my series. But even so, you can see on the right how the subject of the photograph is more the compositional arrangement of the shapes and the colors. Whereas in the left-hand photograph, No Idling, even though I'm still working out of that sort of flat imagery, it's still, you want to go around the bend, and there's a foreground and a background, and it's starting to loosen itself from that, treating the photograph as an object. Now, there was an art critic, Clement Greenberg, who, when I was in art school, which is, I was a painting and sculpture major back in the 70s and 80s. And you studied art history, and the art critic, Clement Greenberg, was one of the major critics that you would study. And Clement Greenberg believed, now it didn't apply to photography, but with painting, painting should be flat. The canvas is flat, and you should treat it as an object. And this is a teacher of mine, Alan D'Arcangelo, one of his paintings. And next to it is one of my photographs. And you can see how the same subject matter, when it's taken into the night, the depth and the drawing you in becomes so important. But I had to fight always with this sensibility that I wanted to flatten things out. Now, this is another painter, Edward Rouchet. Now, he wasn't a professor of mine, but he was important to photography. And this is around the same time as the Alan D'Arcangelo painting. And what I find very interesting about this painting, and it's next to one of my photographs, is you take the elements that normally would draw you into the image, perspective, the angles, but he still remains totally flat. It was the aesthetic of the time, and it is still an aesthetic that many photographers work with, and especially daytime photographers. Whereas on your right, you see the Sitko photograph, where again, it has the angles, but the angles are what draw you in. And you want to go into the photograph and turn the corner. And finally, I'm showing a photograph, two photographs of Robert Adams. And it really shows you what the night does. On the left is from his Colorado Springs series, a very important series to new topographic photographs, and his Summer Night series. And I think, as I said before, most artists don't have the lines and boxes that we create to define things, like the new topographic movement is supposed to be a certain way. The photographer just goes out and shoots. And here he is on the left-hand side. This is a classic photograph that you would think of as an object. It is a beautiful composition. It is very classical, very formal. Whereas on the right, the same photographer, and when he goes out at night, you want to walk inside. It has mood and it has a feeling, and it is a whole different aesthetic. And it is an aesthetic that I really was drawn to in starting my series, Easton Nights. Urban Romantics is a title I'd like to use in reference to a number of other photographers that I look at today, and to my own work, Easton Nights. But it's not a title I made up. It's a title of George Tice's book of night photography. And so I'm going over a couple more influences, George Tice, of course, being the most important. But I'm going back almost 40 years as an undergraduate, before I even was studying art. I took a class in romantic literature. These are two of the books which I still own that really influenced my art in general. And the thing about romantic literature that stuck with me was that the authors wanted to create worlds that they would bring people inside. Now, George MacDonald was a minister and he wanted to give religious messages. I don't have a religious message, but it's the same idea of bringing in people into your world to tell a story. E.T.A. Hoffman's most well known for Nutcracker and the King of Mice, which got adapted a few times and later became the ballet. Then Charles Birchfield is another influence of mine that as a painter, I studied landscape painting and our teachers would bring us out into the field and we would paint straight from nature, quick paintings, 2 or 3 hours. But I tended to be very stylized. And so I was told at that time, back in probably 1978, 79, that I should look at Charles Birchfield. And I did, and I never really emulated him, but he's always been important to me. And probably the most important aspect of his work that I feel still comes across in the night photography and in the Easton Nights series is that he was always attempting to show more than just the visual. And I feel like the night photographs, very different than the day photographs, there always seems to be more. There seems to be a smell, there seems to be a sound, and it has that same sort of characteristics that you would see in a Charles Birchfield painting. So now I'm going to talk a little about my peers. These are people that I look at on a daily basis. And they often say you are who your friends are. Well, this is the type of photography I look at a lot. But I'm going to start with one photographer who generally is not close to what I do and what most of the night photographers do. This is Gregory Crutzen. I do get asked about him a lot, and so I thought I'd stick him into this section first. He's one of the great masters of night photography. But his work is very different in that most of the night photographers work very quickly. They may take time to set up their cameras, but it's really not a staged photograph. And Gregory Crutzen, on the other hand, does very elaborate stages. And there's a wonderful video out about how he goes about his photography. I highly recommend you looking at him, but it does not fall in the same sort of category, I think, as the night photography that I do, which, and most of the people that I look at, it's more on the edge of street photography because it's instantaneous, not planned. And Gregory Crutzen is the other end of the spectrum. And then there's Todd Hito, who I think is sort of in between, where his photographs do get close to what most of the others are doing. I always felt like his photographs were like miniature Mark Rothko's. And unfortunately, I didn't find the right example here. This is the cover of his book, House Hunting. But his photographs very often are very foggy nights and they seem to glow, and there's not an emphasis on depth and drawing you in, like I talked about, something that I like with my photos and with a lot of the other night photographers. His are more almost like a miniature Mark Rothko that you would sit with, and it emanates to you. But if I had to pick one photographer of all the night photographers that I most love to look at, it would be Patrick Joust. His work has so much personality, and it has so much emotion, and it has so much of what night photography has to offer. This is one of his from Western Pennsylvania, and it's the beautiful rhythm of the houses and the glow. here and there is a glow and a little bit of tree in the back, but the foreground bringing you into the photo. Then there's Emmanuel Monzon, who generally is not a night photographer, but he does have a night photography series that he continually adds to. And when he does it, he's very precise and very elegant. And I think has his own look in all of his photographs, and it comes across very special in his night photography. And he's somebody I've been looking at since I started in photography, before I even got into the night shots. He lives over in Seattle, and I think most of his shots are, it's all over the West Coast, but mainly West Coast photographs. And I picked Christopher Sukup because I felt like he was fairly typical of a lot of photographers, and I'm skipping so many people I love and look at. But Christopher does such an excellent and high quality job, but it is typical again of what so many photographers do. And it's sort of the best example. A lot of precision, but the colors, the mood, the sort of blue tone, or sometimes an orange tone or green tone, which you find a lot of times, these colors in night photography. So I look at him, and I love to look at his photographs on a daily basis. Then you have Dave Giordano, who is probably the most expressive of all the night photographers. His photographs always have great color. He did a book about night photographs from Detroit, and he was a career photographer, and so has a long history of great photographs, which many of them are black and white and not night photographs, but just a wonderful photographer, and very much fun to look at, and very important to me. And then his wife, Jeanette Kuhn, who I find very unusual in that, as I mentioned, it's very hard to retain the geometry in a photograph and still keep the sort of emotion that comes with night photography, and she manages to do that. This photograph, very geometric, but it really pops. It really has a life and emotion, and it's very different than if you remember the Robert Adams Colorado Springs photograph, which was very formal also, but very stark and classical. So I find her a very interesting night photographer. So now I'm going to compare a few. This is the photograph I showed you before of Patrick Joust, and this is one of the photographers who I feel fit more into that new topographic sort of category, Nico Kaliontis. And both photographs have the same subject matter. A row of houses, and the rhythm of the houses is beautiful in both of them, and that's the main aspect that you look at the photographs. But the look is so different. And the night photograph is very emotional, whereas the daytime photograph is very classical, formal, and stately. And this is another one of Nico's photographs, and one of mine, which is actually of the same exact spot. And it shows you on the left how classical his photographs are, very formal composition. The object, you could see this as a large painting, a very elegant painting, whereas mine starts to become three-dimensional. You see the door in the background, which he's cut out completely, and you want to walk inside. And then one other photograph. This is Theo Anderson, who also works in the Lehigh Valley and does really beautiful photographs. And this again is the same subject matter, same spot photographed in a very formal classical daytime photograph by Theo, and then one of mine in nighttime, where you start to get the depth and the angles, and start to walk into it, and it has a whole different feel just because it's night. So now I'm going to go into the body of Easton Nights, And I divided it into 9 categories. I mean, there could be more, there could be less, and most photographs could go in several of the categories. But these are all categories where I felt like it's something special to either the series Easton Nights or to night photography in general. I think dreams is a quality that most people can identify with night photography. And it's a quality that I often see of it as sort of a Pan's Labyrinth, sort of beautiful, surreal quality that uh, it's not scary, it's not macabre, it's not frightening. And you have people tell me, I say, I wouldn't go there at night, but to me, it's also so beautifully surreal. And so that's one of the dreamlike aspects that I see from the photographs. But there are other people that see it as a John Carpenter stage set, and they look at it for the macabre. So everyone has their own opinion, and there occasionally are photographs that fall into that little bit scary scenario, like this one here with the ghosts and gowns. Makes you not want to get married. Then there's this one with the child in the bush, which again, I didn't see it when I shot. I was shooting the green lights on the porch, and I come back with this scary little kid in the bushes. But the dreamlike quality, I think, is probably the most common that applies to almost every photograph. I think the most unique quality of night photography that is different than any other type of photography is the color. And I think the reason for this is the eye works with 2 organs. The rods see black and white, and the cones see color. And as we get into the dark, the cones stop working. But with the camera, this is not the case. So the camera is still seeing the color that even when I'm shooting, I cannot see it. And you come back from shooting with some of the most fabulous colors. And I often say that night photography has its own color wheel. The colors are mixed not from daylight, they're mixed from all sorts of artificial light. It's a whole different formula. And it's often a tendency you want to correct it. You get people saying that the color temperature is wrong, but it's hard to know what right is because we physically can't see it. And so I do my best to leave the colors. You get a lot of these greens like this. You'll get a lot of oranges and blues that you never see during the daytime, but they're really there. They're just things we can't see. So it adds to that surreal sort of Pan's Labyrinth feel that I mentioned in the dream category as well. But it is just one of the most beautiful qualities of night photography. The next category is words. And if you've ever seen an Ed Ruscha painting, well, this is one. They're large paintings, and they're entirely made up of just a few words. And when you're out at night, one of the most common things that you will see is lit up words. They're isolated, they're emphasized, they're always something that takes on special importance, very much in the way that Ed Ruscha would isolate them, put them on the wall of a big museum, and they would take over the space. It's very much the same thing when you're out at night, and the only thing lit up is this sign and these words, and they act as a marker in time. They're special to our culture, and they're one of the most important and telling aspects of the night photography. Now, this is one that didn't make it into the clip, but I thought it was one of the best word photographs. I was accused of making a montage or a composite with the vision impaired sign, with the press sign, and the McDonald's all magically appearing together. But I assure you, all these words are there. It's still there. It's on the corner of Tillman and 15th in Allentown. Now, geometries has 2 parts to it. There's the flat sort of geometry like this that connected to my earlier day photographs. And then there's the more voluminous sort of photograph like this, where you have this giant ball emphasized by night. This is one of the early photographs, which was kind of a transition between the flat photographs and the photographs that had the depth to it. And in general, the night takes geometry and creates it into more of an isolated shape. You can give the flat, again, flat shapes like this, which is the back of a mall. This is another overpass, which is flattened out at night and gives you very beautiful colors. And then you have shapes like this, where the island and the tree have this special three-dimensional quality, which only you have at night. And again, the very dramatic shipping truck containers. And finally, the um, oil container in Phillipsburg, which takes on this very voluminous and dramatic look at night. I talked a little before about Gregory Crewdson and how his photographs were elaborately staged. Well, most of the photographers that I follow, and myself is included in this, we just photograph what's there. And it's amazing how stage-like they are. And you can actually find a connection between the Gregory Crewdson photograph, which is elaborately, purposefully staged, and a natural scene that you see on just about any quarter outside at night. The lighting at night is naturally theatrical, and the scenes also can be naturally theatrical. And when in fact, during the day when we wake up, these are our stages. So they're pre-made stages, and it is something also, again, that you really only see at night. At day, when the sky is background, it gets all muddled. At night, you have this strong sense of lighting that is really magical. This is a section called beehives, which refers to our homes, which are like beehives we all go back to at night. And I bring you back to the Charles Birchfield painting, which again, the thing that Charles Birchfield was always trying to do was to show something much more than the visual, the energy and the life, the sounds. And I feel like when I'm out photographing the houses, this is the sort of feeling I get. I feel like they're growing, they're moving. They have such personality. They probably reflect the personality of those that are in them. They can kind of stretch out into space, and you begin to wonder what's going on inside. You know there's an energy there. There's a life there, and it just means so much more than any other building that is out there when you're photographing at night. Some of them can look very elegant, even though this is a very simple house. You can see the golden canopy really makes it into a special place. And then a little house like this is a very inexpensive small house, but it's majestic and very proud looking. And even the houses like this, which don't look all that comfortable, they still show just great depth of character. And this one as well was a house in Phillipsburg, such character, so many layers, so many things seem like they happened in this house. And you come back to even a simple house like this, it just has a personality. So I'll go on to the next category, which is portals. And similar to the house is the most important building. The portal is the most important part of the building. It is the one that's most lit at night, the one you find highlighted more than any part of the building. And it's also the entry into our lives or our businesses. And so it carries a special and an extra meaning to it. And so I kind of divided that off as a separate category, because I think we come across many fascinating doorways and entries, and they're very inviting and full of life and energy on their own. Now, my favorite category, the one that means the most, the photos that mean the most to me, is Nemesis, which is where art copies life. And in these photos, very often the photos have taken on their own story. This is a mall that is no longer, because the trees won this battle. It went out of business. Fashion hats, after hours fashions, these are the photos that I feel I aim towards, and you can't always tell when you're going to get them, but what else would truck digestion look like? You just the stories come and they're presented to you, and they're the most rewarding photographs that I feel like I take, the most important photographs in the Easton Nights series. This is a fire station, probably the only one in this shape in the entire world. I wonder where the fire trucks go. And this back to this one, which I put in the words section as well, but it is one of those that went beyond the words and has special meaning. At the end of the night is everyone else's beginning. And so I end with the beginning. The dawn is a very nice time to photograph. It's very difficult because you have a bright sky and you don't want to get the exposure right or get the exposure off on the buildings, because you tend to get the buildings all underexposed or the sky becomes overexposed. So it's a very difficult, technically a difficult time to photograph, but it's a very special light because it has a different color. You have those strange colors that you got, I talked about before in the color section, getting mixed with the real daylight colors. And it seems like this, which are before sunrise, but they're at the same time, they're fully lit up. And it gives a very ethereal, mystical look. This is a good one to end with, the Summer Night's Dream. So that's the conclusion for my talk about the series itself and the photographs. And I'd like to just talk a little bit now about the videos, which I have started to incorporate into the exhibit. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the exhibit itself. The videos have been a way for me to show a lot of the photos which can't get into the show. The show, this exhibit is 65 photos, but there are hundreds and hundreds of photos. And so I've used those same categories and I've put them together with music by composers and musicians I like. This one done by Adam Tendler is John Cage's Dream. But it allows me to show a lot more photographs, and it also allows the viewer to come inside. So I've started to incorporate this into the exhibits. This one, Colors, was done with Blake Tyson's beautiful marimba piece, which has a lot of color in it itself, and it matched the theme of colors for the video. And each video will have an artist that I collaborate with, and I'll try and match each piece of music to one of my groups of photos. This one by Robert Patterson, who does very dramatic music like this one, Tongue and Groove. And I felt like the drama very fitting for the category of stages, which I went over earlier in the lecture. And so these videos, which I eventually hope to have 9, will accompany the exhibits and allow people to see a larger number of photographs. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the exhibit itself. And I make my own framing. And the great thing about this is it has allowed the exhibit to evolve along with the photographs themselves. As you can see, I use a traditional matting. I actually paint the mats black because it's a deeper black. But as I mentioned before, I want people to come inside the photographs. So most people will be mounting a photograph as a floated object, whereas I'm looking at it really as a window. And so I use traditional matting, which a lot of people frown upon, but I think it's appropriate to the show. And then you have that same sort of quality that I say I want people to come inside. In the exhibit itself, by making my two-sided frames, no matter where you go in the exhibit, there's a piece in front of you and in back of you. You're surrounded by the images. And so you're actually inside the show in a way that wouldn't work if you were just looking at all the pieces put along the wall. And I really feel this has been one of the more successful aspects of the whole series. And it's something that you don't know where it's going to go. It evolved on its own, and hopefully it'll evolve more. But it is an important part of the presentation. And I think the presentation in the end, well, that is the end result for me.